Okay, so to get started with these AWS SDKs, we are going to need to install a few packages. So currently we only have Zod installed, so we are still pretty lightweight on the project dependencies. But now we're going to start using the AWS dependencies to talk to DynamoDB. So first, let's install the yarn, add the client for DynamoDB. So it's the AWS SDK client DynamoDB. And then we also want the AWS SDK /lib for DynamoDB. And then we want the AWS Lambda installed and the package UUID. So these are a few packages that we're going to be using now. So I'm just going to run this and let it install. So these two DynamoDB packages, I'll get to them in just a second why we need them. And now that that is installed, I want to install one dev dependency for the AWS Lambda package. So we can say -dev, and we want to install the @types for AWS Lambda. Okay, with that all set up, now we can actually go to our book repository and we can start using the SDK. So again, to make our code more maintainable, let's say we want to use this DynamoDB connection setup in a few different places. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder called clients, and under the clients I create a function file called create DynamoDB client.ts. And all we're going to do here is we're going to set up, according to the DynamoDB documentation for the SDK, we're going to set up the connection through this function so it can be reused. So here we're going to say import from @AWS client. We want to get the DynamoDB client. Oops. And then we can export a default function, and we call this function the same as the file name, create DynamoDB client. And what this is going to do is we're going to create a client with this new DynamoDB client, and we can provide it some properties in here that we're not going to worry about now. And to make working with the DynamoDB SDK easier, we're going to wrap this client with a document client. So that's what the other library is for. So we're going to create DynamoDB document client. And we're going to set this equal to DynamoDB document client, which gets imported from the libs package. And then here we call the from method and we pass it in just the root client down here. And then we return this DB document client. So this will return a DynamoDB document client, and we can use this to interact with DynamoDB and create queries and stuff like that. So now that we've created this function that basically sets up the SDK to connect with DynamoDB, we can inject that into our book repository. So we can create this client, so DB client. So this can now be any type of database. It doesn't need to be just DynamoDB, but then we can create a DynamoDB client and we can inject that into our repository, and now our repository should require the DB client. DB client should be equal to the DynamoDB DB document client. Just like that. Now, in our create book and our get book by ID, we can actually use this .db client to interact with DynamoDB. So let's actually go to the documentation of this SDK so I can show you a bit of what was set up now. And then we can look at some of the methods that we can use to actually interact with creating a book, getting a book by ID, and doing some queries and stuff like that. Okay, so here I've Googled the DynamoDB AWS JS SDK version 3. So if we go to this documentation, we can on the side already see some of the starred services to view is DynamoDB, which I'm going to click on. And then here we can see some information. So first off, we use the same npm package. So we have installed the AWS client and we used yarn. So I believe somewhere here you would get the document client, so DynamoDB client config, and here we can see all of the different commands that we can run with this SDK. I do want to get to the document client documentation. Okay, so here we are at the libDynamoDB package, which we also installed. And basically what this does as an overview here, we can see that this document client simplifies working with items in DynamoDB by abstracting away some of the notation of attribute values. So it would have this type of notation where you have the attribute type and then the values, and then again the attribute types and the values. And this kind of becomes a bit messy to work with because you find yourself keep mapping between what DynamoDB has and just a normal JSON object. And this document client pretty much does exactly that. It gives us the freedom. So here we can see the same setup that we have in our code. And yeah, so this just makes it a lot easier to work with DynamoDB and its internal data structure. So here we can also see some of the queries that we can use. So some of them would be like the put item. Alright, so we have something like the put command, and we can see, for example, the put command has the put input and the put output. And if we click on this page, it takes us to a bit of a more detailed definition of how this works. So yeah, let's dive into the code and we play around with some of these functions. Okay, so in order to create a book, we are currently only getting a title and we want to add this to DynamoDB. So how do we do this? First of all, we have this .db client, and on this DB client we have a function called send, and this send needs to take in a command from AWS, and from the AWS package we can import a few commands. So let's call this, what do we need to provide it here? What's the short command? So let's just call it command. So we're going to create a command up here, and this command is going to be of type new put command, and it will import from the DynamoDB lib. It will import this new put command, and this new put command takes in a few properties. Okay, and then we will take this command and we'll pass it to the send function. And because this returns a promise, we need to await this. And now we need to define this command. So what do we want this command to be? Well, we need to provide it a table name, and we know our table name is books table, and we need to provide it with an actual item, and this item will be some object that defines our book, so the item that we want to add. And let's actually create that up here. So we can say our book item is equal to this object, and we will set our item here equals to this book item. Okay, so now we have that set up. In order to create this book will need a primary key or a partition key, and it will need a sk for the sort key, and this will be strings. So let's just add strings in it for now. And then we want to give this book a title. And where do we get the title? Well, from the book data that's passed into the function, we can get the title. So now we need to understand how do we want to create these primary and secondary keys. In order to search in DynamoDB, you have to always provide the partition key, and then the sort key can be used to do a bunch of different functions for contains or is between this and yeah, just a bunch of fancy other operations we can do on the sort key. So I'm going to create this book like this. We're going to have a partition key of book. So everything will all the books will basically have this partition key, and in the sort key we will specify something that might need to be searchable for this book. So we're going to create the book, and then we're going to add some UUID in here, and we need to now add this string template literal, and we want to add some UUID. So let's import the UUID package. So import v4 as UUID from UUID. Okay, and it's complaining that we don't have these types installed, so let's quickly do that. Yarn add okay. Now we should be okay. And this will generate the book sort key with some UUID. So we are able to search all the books, or we can search for a specific book where this property exists and there is some UUID that follows to make an exact match on our primary key. So this is getting quite technical with regards to how DynamoDB works, and I do not want to go into it for this video series. So if you're interested in wanting to learn more about DynamoDB, leave a comment and we can make that happen. Okay, so here we have a basic book that's ready to be created. Let's actually go ahead and deploy this function, which is the create books function, but we also have this new create DynamoDB client, but we don't need to deploy the whole stack. We can only deploy this one function. So how do we do that? We can say SLS deploy function with the F flag and then the function name, which is create book. So if we run this and wait, now it should go ahead and push the new code with the updated SDK to Lambda. So let's actually take a look at that code. So here I'm back in my AWS console, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to the Lambda service. I'm going to click on my application of the book API, and I'm going to have a look at create book Lambda function. I want to take a look at this code. So here we can see the app, the handlers, and we have the create book. Under here, under this handler, we see a bunch of hard to read JavaScript, but one thing I want to search for is the create DynamoDB client, DB client. Okay, so here we can see that it has imported this code, so we now are going to be able to use the DynamoDB SDK to interact with the table. But first, let's view the logs. So let's set up a terminal to actually view this log. So SLS logs of the function create book, and we want to tail it. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're gonna actually try and go ahead and create the book. So I'm gonna go to our endpoints here, and I'm pretty sure this URL has changed. So let me go and fetch what the new URL is. So API gateway, this is the new endpoint. Okay, it has not changed. Cool. So we have not removed and redeployed it yet, which I believe is the case. So we can now say post to books, and we want to send a body, and in this body we'll have a title, and we call this test1. Okay, and let's send. And we can see there's an error, something went wrong, please check your logs. And here the logs pop up telling us exactly what is wrong. Create book handler error, access denied exception. So this user is not authorized to perform DynamoDB put items on resource this DynamoDB books table. So because no identity-based policy allows the DynamoDB put item action. So this is quite a mouthful, and if you were to Google it, and you'd probably see this error of access denied come up quite a lot when you're working with AWS. So basically what this means is our Lambda function, this book repository that is part of the create Lambda function handler. So this create book. This Lambda function, which gets created and mentioned all the way up here, this Lambda function does not have the privileges to make a put request to DynamoDB. So how do we solve this? Well, we can add IIM roles to a specific function alone, but because all of these functions are going to interact with my DynamoDB table, I can again add a default up here. So how would this look? So I'm gonna again paste some of it in here. So we're gonna have under the timeout or anywhere in there, we're gonna add a new field called IIM with the role, with the statement, and then we have this object which has a bunch of other properties. And here we are going to say allow resource to connect to any resource, which you can refine to only this DynamoDB resource. But for now, I'm mentioning all the resources. And then we specify some of the types of commands we want to do in order to finish up our API. So we're going to want to be able to do queries. We want to do the put item. So that is the one that we currently got blocked for. And we want to be able to update. We want to be able to get the item. And then we want to be able to delete the item. So I'm going to save this now. And now I need to do a full SLS deploy again, because I made changes to the root. I need to deploy this whole service again. So that's as easy as just calling SLS deploy again. This will go ahead and set up the IIM roles, which will allow us to actually call these different functions, this put command. So once this is done, we can try again. Okay, so the deployment was successful. So now if we head back and open up our SLS logs for the function create books or create book, and we tail that stream, and we go back here and we now do a send call. We actually get back the data, which is still being returned here. We can see when we actually create this book for the send command, we are still returning this like hard-coded data, but we do not see any error being thrown. So that means we successfully added it to DynamoDB. So let's actually take a look if that is the case. So we're going to go into the console, and then we're going to search for DynamoDB. We're going to go to our tables, our books table, and we're going to inspect our items. Start the scan. We see we have one item. So let's explore the items in the table. And here we can see we have a PK of value book. Let's actually go into the property itself like this. So here we can see we have a partition key of book, and we have a sort key of book hash, and then some UUID. And we use hashes usually to make different parts of the string searchable and start grouping stuff this way. And then we can add as much properties, because it's a NoSQL database, we can add as much properties here as we want. For now, we only have title and test1. So this is the title that we submitted all the way from our API up here, and it created this book, which is awesome, right? So now let's actually go ahead and do the get for book. So now that we've created a book, we want to be able to get a book. So again, let's actually return the book that we just created up here. we don't want the PK and the SK to be returned this way. So let's go ahead and define the book ID up here as UUID, and then just add in the book ID like this, so that when we return, we can return the book ID with the title. So you can also get the book that was created back, but we don't want this SK and PK to be leaked in that way to the front end. We just want the front end or the consumers of the API to worry about one ID. Okay, so now we should be able to deploy that, and it should return not the hard-coded values anymore, but we'll do that after we get a book by ID. So how do we get a book? So again, we need to interact with the database, and this is quite easy. We're going to create a command again, and this will be a get command. And we can see how a get command looks. Once again, we need a table name, and we will probably move this table name to some environment variable that can be changed all the way from here. Okay, so then we need to search based on a key. So this primary key that gets formed based on the partition key and the sort key, this is like the main idea behind DynamoDB. And as soon as you get comfortable with modeling stuff this way, and it's quite efficient and very useful. So first we need the PK, and we want the PK and the SK to match exactly. So the PK is very easy because that's just the word book. And the SK is pretty much where we have this unique identification added to make this key as a whole unique, because we have a SK with the value of book with a hash and then some book ID. So that's where we can now add in this book ID that we receive from the function, and this will pretty much be it. Now we can do this await again, so we can say await this.db client.send, and we send it this command. And now what do we get back in response? We get a get object output. And if we take a look at how this looks, we get metadata, consumed capacity units, and an item that might be undefined. And we can see that this returns a book or undefined. So here we can then take this item, and if it is there, we return it. If it is not there, we return. So if it is there, then we return it like this, else we return undefined. I'm probably sure there's a cleaner way to do this instead of doing a ternary. But here we want to now return the res.item.sk, and the reason we take the sk value is because that's where we get the ID. So in order to get that ID, we're just going to replace the part of the string that has book hash, and we're going to replace that with the empty string. So it's basically just going to leave us with the ID. So then we have the ID, and the title will be the res.item.title, which is the property that we added in here. Okay, so this should give us a book by ID. We can remove that. And if there's no item found, it just returns undefined. And then we can get all books, and this is also pretty easy with the key setup that we have. So here we're not going to do a get command, but we're going to do a query command, because we're going to query for a bunch of books, not only for one. So the get command only returns one item. You can see it says item, and you'll see now if we do the query command, and this has a table name called books table. And we provided some key condition. So how do these key conditions look? So this is a bit of key condition expressions, and this is a bit of DynamoDB type syntax to help search for things. So we want to search where the PK value is equal to some placeholder PK that we will define with the expression attributes value. So So here we can create this PK. So we're prefixing it with these colons just to make it a bit clearer, and this is the standard of doing it. So the PK should be books or just book, and the SK should match some value. So we are going to add an AND here. So we have the AND, and the SK should begin with the book hash. So we can group other things below the book as well, but here we can say begins with SK, and we add the placeholder. So this is almost like giving it some search function within the condition expression. And we want the SK to begin with this type of setup, right? What is the query command complaining about? I think this got imported from the wrong one. Yep, we need to import it from the lib. Okay, now we have this command. Now we again send this to the const arrays equals await this dot db client dot send, and we send it the command, and this returns a bunch of other stuff, but one of them is items, and items is either undefined or it's an array of records, which are our books. So I'm going to return it this way. So because our function will always return an array, I'm going to return the arrays.items, and if it's undefined or null, we just return an empty array. So this type of records, type of as book or undefined. Okay, so now we get books. We want to be able to delete a book, so let's do that part as well. So we again create a command, which is new delete command, and for the delete command we need to specify probably the table again, books table, and the key to exactly match. So again we can say the primary key should be just book, and the secondary key should be book, and then we can place in the book ID. Okay, this way that looks set up, and we can return nothing here, but we can await this db client and send this delete command. Okay, so there we go with the delete, and now for the update we can pretty much do the same we did for the create. So I'm going to copy this. We can actually, yeah, let's copy that. We're not going to recreate the ID though. So we're not going to do this part again. We're going to create the book item, which has this ID and this ID, and we set the new title, and then we want to put this, and if it already exists it would kind of just override it, but we want to use the update command for this instead. Okay, so the update command, let's take a look over here, and this is going to have a bit of a different syntax as well. We're going to use the update command, which has the key. What do we want to update exactly? And this will be again the PK and the SK, where the SK should match this ID and the PK should just be book. Okay, and what is the new values that we want to update? So we can say expression attribute values, and the values that we want to update is the title at this point. That's the only thing we have. So we can say body data dot title should be equal to that, and we can say update expression. So here again is a long string that we can have different methods. That's helpful, but we can just say the title should be equal to whatever this title placeholder is up here, and this will update the book. So we can return this book item at the end here, or we actually again don't want that setup, so we actually don't need that. And we can just return the new setup like this. Okay, so I think this covers all of the interaction with the database. So let's go ahead and deploy this. So I'm going to close this logs and I'm going to say SLS deploy. Okay, so with that deployment done, now if we try these out and we actually create a new book, so let's call it test2, and we create this one, we get a response back, and let's actually copy these IDs for a second. Okay, I'm just going to paste it in a new tab here, and let's create a new one, 3. And we copy this ID as well. And let's create another one, 4. Okay, so we have created 3 new ones. So let's go ahead and get all of the books. Okay, again, because we are sending a body along, let's get all the books. Okay, so that took a while, but now the consecutive requests are much quicker. But here we can see all the books that we have. 2, 1, 3, 4 with their different IDs. And we are returning them incorrectly. We can see we are returning them with the PK and the SK, and this is not something we want. But let's actually use an ID and get a book by ID. Here we can see that it now returns the ID in the correct fashion. So we will be able to update the get by or get books very quickly. So we can go to that function, get book by ID, get books. Here we only return the items directly, but we want to return a book. So we first would need to map this. So we can say books is equal to the res.items. And if there is nothing, just add it like this. But else we want to map through them. So each item, we want to return an object that is of type as book. And this will be one with an ID. So we can say item.sk dot replace, just like we did previously, the book field or the book string with the hash with just the empty string, and then the title will just be the item.title. So here we have done some JavaScript logic just to work with the data. And if we just want to return this function, we can say SLS deploy function -f and then the function name, which is get books. And this deployment actually happens quite quick. And there you go, it's done. So now if I were to do a get call for all of the books again, so I'm going to remove this ID and I'm just going to make a get call. We can now see it doesn't return the PK and the SK, it only returns the ID. So there we have it. We have API, so we haven't tested the update yet, so let's actually do that. I'm going to update this one. I'm going to give it a new body or just a new title. Updated new title. And we can send this. And it returns back the newly updated one. If we duplicate this call, so I don't need to go back the whole time. Open in a new tab. And here I'm going to go all the way back to just the get all books, and I remove this body again and send. Now we should see this one was updated with the new title, and if I were to try and update another one, let's go to this endpoint definition, update new title number 2 and send, and do a get call. We can see that that was updated. Okay, so now let's try the delete. I just want to delete this one. Let's delete it. Okay, it's deleted. If we search for it now, we only get back 3. And let's go ahead and delete all of them. Okay, deleted. And we do a search again. Okay, deleted, and we go there. Okay, so there we have our basic CRUD operations set up with DynamoDB and AWS Lambda and API Gateway. And we use the serverless framework to set this up. So yeah, I hope you found this helpful. And then next we will continue to add uploads. So we can now upload videos or files or images or any type of asset and connect that to a book. So let's do that next.